thank you for that. Further that point of order, Bob Neal.
Can I tell my honourable fellow West Ham friend that there's nothing wrong with being 67, but I'm glad he's got there a bit before me.
It's very nice to see an outbreak of good humour. Thank you. We now come to the backbench motion on the introduction of the 2019 loan charge. Ross Thomson to move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Backbench Business Committee for agreeing to bring forward this very important debate. I want to thank members of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the loan charge for all of their work today, and thank so many colleagues who have added their names to the motion in front of us today. Because the urgency of today's debate cannot be understated. As of tomorrow, tens of thousands of people and their families will face the huge cost, both physical and emotional, of the loan charge. And HMRC are yet to show any regard to the enormous pain that this legislation has already inflicted on thousands of people across the country. Now, representing Aberdeen South, which is Europe's energy hub and the very heart of the UK's oil and gas industry, my surgeries have been inundated with those concerned about the damage that the loan charge will have on their financial security. Because many of my constituents working in the oil and gas industry were actively encouraged by their companies and professional advisers to enter into these schemes, and without a single peep from HMRC, and some did so for many years. The oil and gas industry is just one of many that has long relied on the hard work of contractors as a crucial element of their supply chains. These contractors provide a hugely valuable workforce, and concerns over the loan charge have not just driven away those who have worked in these industries, but will deter people from contracting in the future. HMRC should be in no doubt that this will be bad for business, bad for public finances, and bad for the country. You know, of course, I'll happily give you.
Very grateful, and I echo his praise for the work of the all-party group, which I think has done very good work on this. I'm sure he's going to come on to the point of retrospection. My constituents who approached me on this, I felt the strongest point they were making was that HMRC allowed these schemes to run for a very long period of years and then declared them retrospective all the way back to the beginning, which is why the potential losses are so great. Does he agree that that's one of the worst parts of what's happening?
I want to thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I couldn't have worded it better myself. Having been part of the APPG and the inquiry, and looking at the retrospective effect of this legislation, that is what has convinced me even more that what is happening is wrong. The people who are coming into my surgeries are quite happy that the government can legislate to change things if they believe them to be wrong, but to go back in history in the way that they have is what has concerned them, and it's concerned me.
Further to that point,
sure, of course.
I'm most grateful, my honourable friend, and I congratulate him on securing this debate. Our right honourable friend on the Treasury bench is always meticulously courteous in his replies. But the Treasury has consistently taken the view that this is technically not retrospective. But our constituents don't live in the technical world, they live in the real world, and this is causing real distress.
I want to thank my honourable friend for his intervention and endorse what he said about our Minister and good friend on the Treasury bench. But he's right that our constituents have real concern at the way HMRC have behaved, their tone, their attitude. And I will come on to touch on that. Yes, of course.
The Minister has sent us today some very warm words about the lengths that HMRC are going to accommodate those people who have fallen foul of these arrangements. But today in the Times there is a report on tax inspectors actually putting pressure on people to pay up ahead of time, even beyond those that have been agreed.
I want to thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's right. The APPG inquiry has taken a lot of evidence on this and the impact that this policy is going to have, and the behaviour of some, particularly from the government side, in making people feel like criminals, which has driven them to a place whereby he's breaking them mentally and emotionally, something that I'm glad it's been reported, and we need to continue to highlight it. Yes, happy to give you
Honourable Member for having secured this important debate. Many of my Slough constituents have got in touch with me and met me personally, expressing distress and concern about the impact of the debt of the loan charge. Does the Honourable Member agree that, considering a recent inquiry by the APPG of loan charge, which he is a member of, that more than two-thirds fear their family relationships are breaking down, that the Minister must assure our constituents today that the HMRC will support them with manageable repayments whereby no one has to be made bankrupt, and that it's absolutely ridiculous that Her Majesty's Treasury have downgraded the promised review into the loan charge to a report as agreed by the House provisionally.
His intervention, and I'm sure his constituents will be grateful to him for raising their concerns in the Chamber. I will touch on some of my own constituents myself later on in my remarks, because this is genuinely causing huge concern, and I hope that those on the Treasury front bench are actually going to be listening to these very cases throughout the duration of the debate. I'll take one more intervention before I make a little bit more progress, but I'll take an intervention from my honourable friend.
For giving way, and I congratulate him on securing this hugely important debate, which in normal times I think would be considered even more important than it's taken even more seriously than it is being today. Does he share my concern that some of the language used by HMRC just seems totally tone deaf? They say in the fact sheet, we've no desire to make things difficult for taxpayers and will always take a fair and even-handed approach to those who genuinely want to settle their affairs. That is the opposite of the experience of my constituents who come to see me, who, in good faith, on professional advice, are being now punished retrospectively and face utter ruin.
To thank my honourable friend for his intervention. Again, I couldn't agree with him more, and he sums it up so well. And it's not just that HMRC being tone deaf. I've found throughout my own interactions between constituents and raising their issues that they've also been tenured. And I have to admit, I am deeply concerned at some of the tactics that have been employed and how it has made some ordinary, normal people feel. That's just not right at all. Could I make a little bit more progress? And absolutely, I'm keen to take in as many interventions as possible. Nobody should be in any doubt that the loan charge has left people living in genuine fear of losing their homes, of being unable to care for their families, and seeing the sum of their lives' work reduced to less than nothing. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we debate this matter, it should not be lost on us that many of those affected and their families are watching this chamber today. They will be watching this debate, and they will be listening to the response from the government very closely. But at this point, I would like to put on record that we do live in a time when our politics has a very heated climate, and that our politics is becoming more personal than we've ever seen it before. And we have seen some disturbing consequences for some of our colleagues in this House because of it. But I would like to be clear that I have found the Minister, Minister Stride, incredibly helpful, supportive, willing to listen to the concerns that I've brought and engaging. So I want to make sure that that is put on the record. Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate has been brought about as a result of the efforts from members across this House and the many campaigners fighting this injustice. The all-party parliamentary group on the loan charge recently launched its report after a long inquiry into the loan charge, and I would commend that report to members, because there are some very truly worrying, emotional and harrowing responses as part of that report. Yes, I'll be very...
Some very good points, which I do have sympathy with, having met people in these situations. But we must also remember, every person using one of these schemes, if they'd have gone to hospital, would have expected not to wait any longer or any less than anybody else paying their taxes. These schemes were taken because people reduced the tax they would pay. Surely we have to remember all the other taxpayers who are paying their taxes and doing so in a legitimate way without this kind of professional advice.
I thank my honourable friend for the point that he has raised. He talks about legitimate paying of taxes, and I will touch on this later in my speech. I know other members will. Those who entered into these schemes, whether that was those in oil and gas, whether it was those in social care or health, did so legitimately. Did so because they were advised to do so. Did so because their employers asked them to do so. Yes, sure.
I'm very grateful to my friend for giving way. He's being very generous with his time. He's making some excellent points. And on that point in particular, something that struck me in the correspondence I've received from constituents is that they were often, very often, advised by accountants to enter into arrangements which would allow them to take home a large proportion of their income. They were told that it was not illegal, that it was totally above board, and that any tax liabilities would lie with the employer and not the employee. And isn't this part of the problem, that we're dealing with people who are behaving in good faith and yet feel they're now being penalised?
Very true. I want to thank my honourable friend for his intervention. And actually, there's not much more I can add to that, because he's absolutely right. And that is why we're here where we are. Yes, I'll take that.
And does he agree with me that one of the problems with the situation some people find themselves in is because the matters that took place and the advice was given us so long ago, that the opportunity to seek redress from advisors who gave negligent advice may have gone, because those advisors may now be out of business or otherwise unavailable for litigation?
Absolutely. Again, thank you to my honourable friend for his intervention, and I would echo that point. He's absolutely right that many of those who gave advice have seemed to have disappeared into nowhere. I'll take from the other side, yes, I'm quite happy to take your intervention.
He's making an excellent speech, and I think he's capturing the mood on all sides of the House. This is something which all of us, I've got over 200 people affected in my constituency, but isn't it also unfair because this was fully declared on tax returns? So HMRC were aware of what was happening. There was no attempt to hide here. So characterising it as tax avoidance retrospectively seems wholly unjust.
Thank you very much to the honourable member for his intervention. And you're right about HMRC being absolutely aware. People even had to disclose DOTAS forms. They were absolutely aware. I'll take one more intervention and then I'll make a little bit more progress, but happy to take from others.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Following on from the point made by my honourable friend, the member for Cheltenham, not only may the advisers have gone out of business, but there is a legal disjoint here, because, as I understand it, if they were to seek redress, they can only go back 6 years or maybe 9 years if they've only just become aware of the problem, whereas the HMRC is going back 20 years. So there's a big difference between the way they're being pursued and the way they could possibly get redressed.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's right. I don't know if you saw in today's Financial Times a really good article about this particular point of the effects of retrospection and how, in doing so, we're actually breaking some of the safeguards that have been in place for taxpayers, those legal safeguards, to ensure that they have continuity in dealing with their tax affairs. If I could make just a little bit more progress, but then I'll make sure that I do take more interventions. I was talking about the all-party parliamentary group, the report which has been launched. Of the 1,768 responses received by the APPG, nearly one-third have received no information whatsoever from HMRC about the loan charge. Now, this flies directly in the face of HMRC's repeated claims that people have been given 3 years' notice of the impending changes to legislation. And a similar number of respondents also believe that they have no possible means of settling their case with HMRC. The government leaves them facing bankruptcy, a future facing more than of those affected. I receive news stories from constituents every day detailing the pain that they and their families are enduring with the threat of the loan charge hanging over them. That is why I'll happily take an intervention and then I'll take from my friend behind me.
His words about the Minister, who's always been assiduous and diligent in all his dealings with me on this matter, and I congratulate him on his work in leading the APPG's inquiry. But does he think that the time has not come for HMRC to actually acknowledge that we must now have an independent inquiry into this issue, led by an experienced tax judge.
Thank you for your intervention. I wholeheartedly agree, and that's what's in the motion today, because I think that is the best way forward to give certainty to our constituents. I'll take one more intervention, then I must make progress. Thank you.
I'm very grateful. 170 of my constituents in Hendon have been affected by the charge, and many actually went into this scheme in good faith. And just 2 weeks ago, at one of my surgeries, a constituent came to see me, and she'd been sent a bill for £91,000 by the HMRC. But when she challenged that, they revised it down to £41,000. There seems to be some discrepancy between these amounts and the discretion of the HMRC to actually withdraw their request for these monies.
Absolutely. That's a very good point that my honourable friend makes, and actually it's part of the evidence that we've gathered from the inquiry. Actually, and it is deeply concerning that a lot of the sums received by our constituents have been miscalculated by HMRC, and that needs to be addressed. Now, as I was saying, I have heard I will make some progress, but I will take some more interventions before I finish. I do receive stories from constituents every day detailing the pain that they and their families are enduring with the threat of the loan charge hanging over them, which is why we are here today, because it's about real people, real lives, and not just lines on a spreadsheet. And I will share with you what one of my constituents recently wrote to me, where they said, "The loan charge has very likely cost me my marriage, and I stand to lose everything. I cannot believe that this is happening." This story is far from an isolated case, and I'm sure that members across the House have had similar stories from their constituents, because the loan charge is breaking apart families before us. Yet HMRC have remained both intransigent and tenured. So today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are calling for and actually something which I believe is a very simple request, that the Government place the loan charge on hold to investigate the true impact that its changes will bring to countless families across the country. And I have heard from colleagues who believe that those involved in such schemes were somehow devious people, that they were mega wealthy people. But what I tell them is that I have had constituents who, and one of them in particular, who recently came to see me, who, at the end of a career working in health and in social care, attended one of my surgeries to tell me that of the guilt that he felt towards his family, who he felt that he had let down. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really grateful to him for giving way. And you'd be aware, of course, when we took evidence as the all-party group, we actually had a family whose father had committed suicide. And indeed, I received this email from a constituent of mine, and if I can indulge the House, he writes, "I find all this massively worryingly and stressful, and I try not to discuss with my wife, otherwise she would feel the same. At times, I have considered suicide, but realise that that will not help no one and impact my family most." It's having a terrible effect on people's mental health, isn't it?
Just before the honourable gentleman replies, I do want to point out that there are a lot of speakers this afternoon, and I'm sure that the honourable gentleman will bear that in mind in finishing his speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your intervention. And again, I couldn't agree more. We've all heard some harrowing testimony in our constituencies. My constituent talked about the stress and anxiety that keeps him awake at night and the fears for his family's future. He cannot escape the fear brought about from a crippling demand from HMRC that will leave him unable to even keep a roof over his family's head. He went on to say that the loan charge has removed all joy from his life, leaving him unable to concentrate on everyday tasks or even enjoy the time with his wife and young children. This government's record on mental health is something I know that those of us on these benches are proud of. However, we do jeopardise this hard work if we continue a cold approach to people in our communities facing this charge. Sorry, I will continue to make progress. Thank you. This story is far from unique. More stories emerge every day from people who fear the breakup of their families and futures devoid of opportunities as they face lifelong payments to cover HMRC demands. Another constituent wrote to me recently about his long work in oil and gas and how he has experienced the highs and lows of the industry for decades. But HMRC are now, he told me, demanding nearly £200,000 dating back to 2 decades. And he went on to say, "I am 59 in July this year. I have no assets. I will have 5 or 6 years of working life left, assuming that I get to work. Even if I am lucky enough to secure a job for that period, trying to pay that amount of money really is mission impossible." apologies. I will make progress so others can speak in this debate. My constituent is facing financial ruin at the end of his long career in the oil and gas industry. That has seen him work hard during boom and bust. HMRC are turning a lifetime of work to nothing, delivering my constituent a bigger blow than the oil market ever could have. It cannot be ignored that over half of those who responded to the APPG inquiry believe that these changes will place their chosen career in danger. The loan charge is driving people away from industries in which they have long played an important part. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is intolerable, and I fear that there has been a complete breakdown in trust between the people and the authorities that are responsible for upholding the rule of law. It is a sad reality that this breakdown in trust will not end with those who have been directly affected by the loan charge scandal. There will instead be lasting damage to the trust that people of this country have long put in the very institutions that they have an expectation will serve them fairly. The stories I have shared today are but a drop in the ocean compared to the number affected. Each person acted in good faith, and each of them has been let down by HMRC. The fact that the government continue to pursue the loan charge without hesitation or thought to those who will be affected for the rest of their life greatly saddens me. Many of the people who now find themselves facing retrospective charges were simply acting on the professional advice of employers and advisers at the time. The tax arrangements that these individuals entered into were presented as entirely legal, legitimate financial planning and HMRC compliant. Madam Deputy Speaker, none of us have an objection to people paying a fair share of tax. Indeed, we should be doing more to crack down on those complicit in tax evasion. However, that is not the case here. HMRC are seeking to claw back tax, breaking legal safeguards to ensure fairness, such as these safeguards have time limits around them, and it was in evidence to the Treasury Subcommittee that the President of the Chartered Institute of Taxation, Ray McCann, said, in reality, the retrospective effect actually displaces all the protections that taxpayers are given by Parliament in terms of getting certainty for their affairs. The behaviour of HMRC to date has greatly concerned me, and I know that other colleagues will elaborate on this further in the debate. Simply, HMRC has demonstrated that it is willing to pursue individuals for settlements, driving them into bankruptcy, breaking families apart and destroying the hope of financial security in old age. HMRC have blatantly gone after the softest targets, individuals who have the least to defend themselves, while largely ignoring those who are most culpable in proliferating these schemes. Members will be aware that a number of people have now taken their lives as a direct consequence of being unfairly pursued by HMRC. And as part of the APPG inquiry, we heard the most harrowing, powerful and emotive evidence I have ever heard. The government has been made aware of the risk that we will only see more cases of this nature. Yet they have continued to refuse to halt settlements. The government has the power to do something about this. It has the ability to ease the suffering, pain and the distress felt by so many. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, they have yet to do so. I hope that we will hear from the Minister that they are willing to change course. Our request is not onerous. A 6-month delay and a review is not the end of the world for the Treasury. But a failure to do this is the end of the world for the thousands of people up and down the country. I am sure that members across this House will join me in urging the Government once again to halt settlements and to urgently bring forward an independent review of the loan charge. To fail to do so will continue to put lives at risk, break families apart and fuel distrust in our institutions. Trust in the rule of law and our democratic system is at stake.
The question is, as on the order paper, as colleagues can see, there are a number of people wanting to participate in this debate. So I'm going to start with an 8-minute time limit. Nick Dakin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a real pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South, who has so comprehensively put the case today at the start of this debate, and I congratulate him and other members and the Backbench Business Committee for allowing this debate, which is clearly capturing the attention of many people because it's very heavily subscribed, as you have already observed, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Honourable Member said, this is about real people, real lives, not names on a spreadsheet, and that's what we should remain focused on. I have serious concern about the introduction of this loan charges having on my constituents. While my constituents' cases are small in number, they're huge in impact. I'm the first to say that people should be paying their taxes and that tax avoidance is wrong and should be stopped. And I'm grateful that HMRC and the Treasury are taking steps to address tax avoidance. I'll give way to a maximum of 2 members.
I thank the honourable gentleman very much for giving way, and I very much agree with him. I think the biggest problem with this is the retrospective nature of it, because tax situations and the way we pay tax over the years has changed so much, and the attitude towards tax. So many people entered into these loan arrangements in good faith, and of course brought on by their employers, not the employee. And so I think the point made by one of my honourable friends behind me is that I think a tax judge needs to actually look at this now, because I think it's a retrospective nature that is so wrong to bring back, asking people to repay massive amounts of money in retrospectively.
Yeah. Makes the point very clearly. It's the retrospective element which is particularly disturbing. And in the case of the loan charge, I'm concerned that a small number of ordinary working people who are not millionaires with broad shoulders, but those on average incomes who've acted in good faith are being hit by significant tax penalties implemented in the most unfair manner. I'll make a bit of progress. I've seen the HMRC's briefing pack on the loan charge, and note where it says in bold, HMRC has never approved tax avoidance schemes. I'm glad to hear that, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I'm not sure in this case if I completely believe it, because this law, when it was passed in 2017, applied a retrospective tax going back all the way to 1999. And notwithstanding the trouble of retrospective law in general, 18 years is a very long time to disapprove of something and not say you don't approve it and not act to fix it. And the reality is that by HMRC not speaking out and by not acting to prevent these loan schemes being used for 18 years, while they maybe did not give explicit approval, they certainly gave implicit acceptance. I give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to my honourable friend, and he's making a very powerful point that, put it at its best, HMRC were woefully slow on this. But would he agree with me that even at that late stage, the Treasury could have sorted this out when they accepted the amendment from the Right Honourable Gentleman for Kingston and Surbiton in February to undertake a proper review and get the matter sorted out so it doesn't have the impact on individuals that he and the Honourable Gentleman have talked about? And isn't it woeful, the fact that HMRC and the Treasury didn't conduct a thorough review, and that's why we now need a proper investigation, and one that's independent?
I tend to agree with my honourable friend, but fortunately we've got the Minister who's a good Minister, and I echo the comments made earlier about the Minister, and I'm sure he will respond in a positive way to this debate at the end, and we can look with anticipation for positive moves to reassure the situation and take steps at this time. To some people, such as tax accountants, employers and even people like my constituents who were employed under these schemes and were told they couldn't be employed otherwise, it's easy to see why they thought it was okay to use these schemes, even more so because they believed they were perfectly legal. Lee Ashcroft, who is one of my constituents impacted by the loan charge, is an engineer in the construction industry. A normal working man who happened to find himself, through no fault of his own, in a sector where businesses contracting workers were obliging them to enter into these schemes if they wanted to work. To Mr Ashcroft, these schemes seemed unfair because there was no holiday pay and no sick pay. That's unfair, but they seemed perfectly legal. He was told they were perfectly legal by the company he worked for, and he checked that out with advisors and was told it was perfectly legal. And Mr Ashcroft needed to work and accepted that this was the deal on which he worked. Mr Ashcroft tells me, in relation to £6,500 in loan payments, HMRC expecting him to agree to settle a bill of £25,500, money he clearly does not have. He strongly disputes the amount he has to pay, vastly in excess of what he earned, but the clock is ticking. If he doesn't enter into an arrangement to pay by the upcoming deadline, he will be expected to pay the full amount with fines added on top. He's being forced to make an impossible decision: accept paying a huge bill he thinks has been miscalculated, as well as being morally wrong, or try and get HMRC to re-evaluate what he owes, which, if unsuccessful, he will have to pay the full amount with fines on top. Either way, this will have a life-changing impact on his future prosperity. Indeed, the amount of worry that I see from him, it's already having a life-changing impact, and people will have had stories of other constituents whose lives have been turned upside down by this. It's unclear to me why HMRC are going after Mr Ashcroft in the first place. After all, it was his employer who forced people into these schemes. It's the employer who benefited financially from this, yet it is the employees who are being left to pick up the tab to HMRC, who have waited 18 years to collect it and want it now, all in one dollop. These advance payment notices are being relentlessly pursued by HMRC with no independent right of appeal, and I think that just does not seem to be plain fair.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think he's raised a really important point. One of the most iniquitous aspects of this case for me is the fact that the promoters of these schemes are not being pursued, and I wonder if he knows of any that have been prosecuted to date.
Well, I don't know the detail, but I think the Minister will be able to update us on that when he responds from the dispatch box, and I do think that is being looked at by the system as well. But nonetheless, the reality is that people were pretty much forced, if they wanted work, to go into these schemes, which they believed, having checked out, were perfectly reasonable and legal. And then, many years later, they're picking up a big tab which doesn't seem to equate to the money they got at the time. It seems very much bigger. And I'm going to complete and finish now, because other members need to speak. So I just want to talk about one of my other constituents, Jonathan Davidson, who told me the loan charge continues to be a very real worry for myself and my family. HMRC have only now, and this is like a couple of weeks ago, only now advised me of the actual settlement figures, which are much higher than my expectations. As such, I am being forced out of retirement, even though my health is not great, and I am now actively looking for employment. And that's an example of what's happening to real lives and real people. For all my constituents affected, this issue is causing severe emotional and financial distress, something which I think HMRC are neglecting, are not taking note of, are behaving as though they don't understand that it's about real people's lives. But this is serious, and it shouldn't be minimised. This is causing a devastating impact on people's lives. The distress is very, very, very real. And HMRC's actions are also self-defeating, as this will undoubtedly cause ordinary working people, push them into bankruptcy, restricting HMRC's ability to recover tax liabilities, which doesn't seem very sensible, and that will create other pressures on the public purse in other areas. So we need some common sense here, Minister, and I see you as the personification of common sense. It's time, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the government to pause this loan charge, to think again about the best way forward, which should be fair to the Exchequer, but also fair to honest working people who believe they were doing the right thing, and who have been, unfortunately, and for many, unavoidably, caught up in these schemes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well done. David Davis.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman who is a near neighbour of mine, and both he and I represent seats in the north of England which are not full of city slickers and billionaires avoiding taxes with expensive lawyers. Can I also pay compliment to the APPG for the work it's done on this, representing constituents up and down the country who've suffered dreadfully under this arrangement. I think it was a US Supreme Court Judge Marshall who once said the power to tax is the power to destroy. And this, I'm afraid, is a very good example of that. A tax policy that is destroying families, homes, mental health and even lives. I give way.
My right honourable friend is making an absolutely pivotal point. This is a deeply unconservative action by a Conservative government. And surely the mood of the House is clear that nobody here wants to see this loan charge implemented. It's devastating people's lives, and the government needs to act, and act immediately.
Well, he makes a powerful point. I'm not going to make a political point out of this, but I'll make a policy point, if you like. 20 years ago, when I was a Public Accounts Committee chairman, it would not be true to say that the Inland Revenue behaved like a charity. They were always pretty tough. But I have to say, in the last 20 years, it seems to me that the exercise of their judgment has become more and more oriented on cash and less on justice. And that's really what we're addressing today. I think part of the reason for that... in a moment. I think part of the reason for that, and it does come back to my honourable friend's point, is that successive chancellors have blurred the distinction between tax avoidance and tax evasion, one of which is illegal and one of which is a matter of judgment. And what that's done is put a huge burden on the judgment of the HMRC, put too much of a burden on it, and so we see them effectively making the law through their judgment and making the law in ways which are deleterious to our constituents. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
My right honourable friend is making a very powerful case around how the tax system is developing, but also the issue of justice. Would he agree with me that there are a number of people in this situation whose employers came up with these schemes and they had no choice but to sign up to these schemes, and in some cases have left the employment of these companies for decades and are being pursued for the funds, but the employers can actually wash themselves of the whole thing. So it is not just, it is not fair for them to be pursued retrospectively, but also to have signed up to schemes over which they had no choice if they wanted to be employed by that company.
Well, he's absolutely right. It's a point I'll come back to in a second, but it also rests on this point of judgment. How does an ordinary lay person forecast what HMRC will decide in 10 or 20 years' time?
Exactly.
And we see this, and unlike others, I'm not going to butter up the Treasury bench today. We see this even in the responses of ministers in previous debates, and even in the letter we received from the Financial Secretary this morning, who talked about the reason for the definition of this scheme. He talked about this for the sole purpose of avoiding tax. Well, I have news for the House. I've got at least a couple of ISAs which are there for the sole purpose of avoiding tax. Are they now illegal? Is that the criterion we should apply? Or plainly not? Plainly not. So there is a real issue here about the approach of HMRC, and I'm going to be rather harder than the APPG in terms of my recommendations. I think they're being just a little bit too reasonable, and I'll come back to that in a second. Come back to that in a second. I've never been reasonable. He's known for it. A number of my colleagues on these benches, I think, are threatening to sue me for calling them reasonable. But before I come to my point, on my main point on this, I want just to go back to the report carried out by the House of Lords Committee on this subject. Now, we have all got very emotional cases impacting on our judgment in this. But you can't say that about the House of Lords. The House of Lords looked at this incredibly dispassionately. They don't have constituents, and so they can be viewed, if you like, as much more dispassionate in a way than us on this. So let me just remind the House of a few of their findings. They found that the Public Bill Committee for the Finance No. 2 Act 2017 did not adequately scrutinise the loan charge. Now, that's incredibly important in something that's going to be retrospective. They didn't properly scrutinise. It was actually just spoken about, I think, by the Minister and the opposition spokesman. I think nobody else in that. They said many witnesses have told them that they joined these schemes, this is my honourable friend's point, without being aware of HMRC's attitude towards them. Many were assured by employers or promoters they were above board, and indeed, as he says, they couldn't have had the jobs if they didn't accept the terms, which is why we find not city slickers, not bankers, not finance specialists, but nurses, I'm afraid not, nurses, doctors, locums, care workers, all caught up in this. People who will never have the resources to pay back this money, never have the resources. Doesn't matter if it's 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. They'll just never have it. And many witnesses also said they declared the schemes to HMRC. Yes. Now, this really is the criminal aspect of this, that you declare a scheme and then 20 years later or 10 years later they come back and say, sorry, we haven't closed your year, you can pay now. You know, and you can pay not a small amount, but £20,000 to £30,000 in the case of some of my constituents. Now, the committee found, and it says here, and this is very important, because again, where does the blame lie here? I think part of the blame lies with HMRC, but part of the blame lies with the employers. And many people have said that's where the HMRC should focus its effort. But the House of Lords Committee found little evidence of action taken against those who promote disguised remuneration schemes. They went on, HMRC seems to be prioritising the recovery of tax revenue over justice, and that's the point which is central to today. The committee noted that the people involved here were unusual subjects of this sort of recovery, and because of the nature of their employment and so on. And then it goes on to say that, of course, these disguised remuneration schemes are unacceptable tax avoidance, but it also said the loan charge is, however, retrospective in its effect. Now, this House was formed in order to challenge the King in his day on the justice of taxes he was demanding and put their own concerns back to the King to get them corrected before we paid the taxes. And we shouldn't forget the fundamental reason for this House's existence, to look after our constituents in the face of demands from the state. Now, it also made a recommendation that HMRC should make clear public statements in future when it's looking at avoidance schemes, because of the fact so much the burden of decision falls on them. They should make it clear to the public at large and anybody in those schemes when it's investigated. I'm afraid not. I've got a couple of minutes and I'm going to come to an end in a second. So that's the House of Lords view. It was very, very critical. For a House of Lords report, it was an incredibly critical report. Now, let me just turn to the issue of the motion and the APPG's approach to this. And as I say, it's incredibly reasonable. Let's have a review, the judge-led review and whatever. Let's take some time and get this sorted out. I'm afraid I think that's altogether too reasonable in the light of the pressure that's being created by this policy. People who are under this policy now are suffering mental strain day in, day out. They are not people who are ever going to find £20,000. And to say to them, you've got 5 years to pay, if you are, as one of my constituents is, on a minimum pension, is meaningless. It just means his house is going, or his car is going, and his family is breaking up under the strain. So my view is very simple. This should not be retrospective at all before 2017. At all. Because there's no reason for it whatsoever given the behaviour of the HMRC. And if we do not get something like that, then I say this to the Treasury, and they can add this into their accounting for this. I will at least, and I suspect many others in this House, will start to pursue a right in law for every citizen that limits the extent to which the state, and particularly HMRC, can take any retroactive action whatsoever against persons, not against companies, not against the Vodafones, but against individuals. Because it seems to me that we owe a duty to our constituents to have some certainty from the state in the taxes they pay.
I'm going to have to reduce the time limit to 7 minutes. Sir Edward Davey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I apologise to the right honourable gentleman member for Halton, Price and Howden for being the chair of a group that produced such a reasonable report. We did it because we wanted to be constructive and to bring this House together. And I want to make 2 points, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, the fact that this issue has brought the House together. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's the power of this House to stop the executive on this matter. And secondly, the nature of the retrospection, which is the issue that's caused me, as well as my constituents' cases, to be so passionate about this point. But first, the cross-party unity. Can I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South, who opened this debate and was the Vice-Chair, and the Honourable Lady for Brentford and Isleworth, and indeed to all the members of the APPG, representing 6 parties in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank all those members who spoke in the Finance Bill report stage when we passed that amendment, quite unusually, because we had cross-party support from every side and every political persuasion, both between parties and within parties. And there's a reason why we got that support, Madam Deputy Speaker. In a second. First of all, our constituents who've come to us, and we've seen the damage it's doing to their lives, real lives, but also because there are key principles of democracy at stake. Parliamentary sovereignty, forget the Brexit debate for this minute, parliamentary sovereignty with respect to holding the executive properly to account for the way it taxes our constituents, and secondly, the rule of law. And those issues have brought this House together, and we need today to continue that message and make it clear to the Minister and clear to the Government we aren't going away till this is put right. I give way to my friend.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. And when he opened up, he was talking about the cross-party support. As my honourable friend will know, when I started the early day motion, whatever it was, about 9-10 months ago, the cross-party support has been astonishing. It's now 148 MPs across all parties, including many members opposite, who supported the early day motion because they really do have concern about around the retrospectiveness, around the fairness. The key is Parliament is really coming together, saying there's a real problem, a real challenge here. Treasury, please look at it. Would my honourable friend agree?
I strongly agree with my honourable friend. I thank him for the work he did in leading that early day motion. But can I say through him to the Minister that it's that cross-party nature and the depth of that support that should make the Minister think today. In a second. Because people have been looking at this House and the way it's been operating rather more closely than they normally do. And they need to know that when this House comes together, the government listens. And it's our constitutional job to make the government listen. And when there's level support and it doesn't, that is an outrage to this House. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I agree with him that it's about time governments listen. On the question of retrospective legislation, I always think, regardless of the issue, retrospective legislation can be a dangerous thing in actual fact. In some instances it might be justifiable, but by and large as a principle I think retrospective legislation is a very dangerous thing. And the other thing that has emerged in the issue as I've listened to it is the people that encourage people in their employment to get involved in these schemes should be the people that should be paying up, to use an expression, and not the victim. Would you not agree with me about that?
Can I just point out that interventions must be short, and do remember interventions mean that other people have less time to speak. Sir Edward Davey.
I agree with the honourable gentleman who intervened, and let me take his point onto the substance of my speech, which is about retrospection. And everyone has paid tribute to the Minister, and I join in that. But I would urge him to look at this retrospective issue, and I want to really go through it. We've spoken to tax professionals on the APPG. We've read lots of material on it. And there is a debate about whether aspects of this are retrospective or not, where that retrospection lies. There's one group of taxpayers who are being hit by the loan charge where I think the retrospective nature is proven beyond doubt. And that is those taxpayers, Madam Deputy Speaker, who've had their tax return to the Treasury with DOTAS added, and sometimes even without DOTAS added, but have come clean on everything they've been doing. And HMRC has accepted that, not opened an inquiry, and it's been closed, and time has passed. Now, under the Taxes Administration Act, Section 9 of 1970, we have been giving taxpayers in that situation total protection from the HMRC coming back to them. That's been for decades. Indeed, we've signed international conventions to say that is the way individuals should be treated. And here we are going back on that. And to be clear to the Minister, when all the tax professionals we talked about believe this was a transgression in those closed cases. And indeed, I asked them if they could find any example ever on the statute books of a government passing a law to override those taxpayer protections, and they could not. So when the government responded to that clause with their review, their argument against all that advice was that it wasn't retrospective because it was a charge on the loan as of now, the outstanding loan. Now, this is interesting because they've never before proven that loanable income. That was the whole point of this whole debacle. Moreover, that loan was taken out in the past. So you might not call it retrospective, you might call it retroactive. Frankly, it's the same thing for the ordinary person. And so the reply to that amendment in the Finance Bill is simply not good enough. It is wrong. This is a breach in the rule of law, particularly for those people with closed tax years. And at the very, very least, the government should not apply the loan charge to those people. That's the recommendation of the APPG. But then we come to those people with open tax years. Now, Madam Speaker, these are people who, where there's inquiry, sometimes years before, 15, 20 years ago, where it wasn't really clear what it was to many of the taxpayers. There was a little form, and they weren't told what their rights were, what they should do in response to it. They just sat there. So some of them didn't even know there was an open inquiry. And those open inquiries have lasted 4 years. The HMRC doing nothing, as the honourable gentleman said. In a second. And surely this is HMRC incompetence, not taxpayer mistakes. And so they're now paying because HMRC couldn't administer the tax system over that period and have tried and failed to get the law right. I'm sorry, you can't come now and penalise our constituents with tax bills of tens of thousands of pounds because HMRC couldn't do their job properly. That's not acceptable. I could wait on gentleman.
Honourable member for giving way. As he rightly points out, HMRC has been looking at disguised remuneration since the late 90s and has had open hundreds of thousands of cases. Mary Aston at the Treasury Committee said, at the time, our strategy meant we were not telling taxpayers enough about what we were doing on their cases. So we will have had an opportunity to open an inquiry or an assessment, but we recognised that that strategy meant that we were not communicating regularly enough to keep them in the picture. Does he agree with me that if that was done, then people could have dealt with those cases and paid up immediately and not had tens of thousands, and in my case, in my constituency, hundreds of thousands of pounds to pay back?
The honourable lady is precisely right. And that is what I think has offended people. And so, while technically those people with open tax years, it's not retrospection, technically, in practice, and frankly in morality, it is. And one of the things that I will pursue generally after this experience, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the use of open tax inquiries by HMRC. This goes against the whole spirit of the 1970 Taxes Management and Tax Administration Act, and frankly against the spirit of the way the rule of law should operate. And I believe on all sides we stand to defend the rule of law, and when we see an abuse of it, we should get angry, we should get passionate, and we should pledge to do something about it, and I hope we will. And so when one comes to how the government should respond to this, I think they should do a halt, a delay, and make a clear message to people who are suffering mentally and socially with their families and their homes, give them some relief, and just by announcing that today at the dispatch box, it would give people a lot of relief. We've been telling them that their tax bills won't come due till the 31st of January 2020, but nevertheless, if they don't talk to HMRC by this Friday, they could suffer severe penalties according to the guidelines. So putting a delay on would help. Moreover, the judge-led inquiry, I think, is the only way we're going to bring people back together, because that inquiry could look at all aspects of this. However, to speak to the right honourable gentleman, I don't want to leave it there. I think the policy should change now with respect to those people with closed tax years, because there's no debate about that. That is retrospection. That's an abuse of the rule of law. And with those with open tax years, there should be, as our report says, a number of measures taken to reduce the pain and to make sure that they can get their tax affairs in order. This House, Madam Speaker, is against abuse of the tax system. That is wrong. It should be stopped. But this House is also in favour of parliamentary sovereignty, the government listen, and upholding the rule of law and upholding long-standing taxpayer protections.
Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't intend to take all of my time because I'm nowhere near as qualified as the right honourable gentleman, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, and my honourable friend, the member for Aberdeen South, who have done a fantastic job just getting us here for this debate today so that we can make representations on behalf of our constituents. And I too want to pay tribute to the Minister Stride, who has been very helpful in all of my queries, responding to my constituents, not always to their liking, Madam Speaker, of course, but he has always been very available, and I want to pay tribute to him and hope that he is as accommodating today as he has been up to this point. The honourable member for South Suffolk, who's not in his place anymore, made reference to people using public services, and therefore they need to pay for them. And if you're talking about evasion versus avoidance, then of course he's absolutely right. But of course, private sector self-employed people, contractors, have a different regime of tax than people who work with PAYE. And of course they have a different structure, so they will look to see if they can make the best use of their tax situation, because they don't get sick pay and they don't get holiday and someone isn't paying their pension for them. So of course they're going to be looking for the most efficient way to deal with their tax. And some of these schemes have been shown to be that for them. And of course they ask the questions. Of course they ask the questions. And we all know that they ask the questions. There are very few people that we think that are caught up in this deliberately went out of their way to avoid tax. I will.
My honourable member giving way, and I certainly would endorse what he said about the Minister, who has been extremely receptive, and we hope that he is going to take action. Is he aware that many of these people are well into their late 50s and many over 60, and have got no chance of ever recovering their financial position? And some of my constituents specifically asked the revenue whether everything was in order and correct and proper, and they were told categorically it was, and yet they allowed them to take out future schemes in future years.
My honourable friend makes a very good point. That is exactly what my constituents have been saying to me, and some of those my constituents are nearing retirement with absolutely no chance of paying back what they are told they are owed. And furthermore, they tell me, and I hope the Minister will confirm or not, that these schemes still exist, that people are still promoting schemes very similar to this. And if that is the case, then it's incumbent on the HMRC and the government to be shutting down the schemes and going after the people that did them. I will.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way. He makes an excellent point, which is that you can't just treat people, and I have a great number of constituents who are very distressed about this, as people who have just made... You can't approach them in a technical way, because this is people's real lives. And the Treasury must bear some culpability, given that they have at least allowed these schemes to take place, to be used, when everyone else is acting in good faith investing in them.
He's absolutely right, and of course I think that we are finding a consensus across the House that we all agree with that, and people did ask these questions. They were convinced by people that promoted these schemes that sometimes it was the only thing they could do, but that they were legal, and they asked those questions, and some of them asked those questions of the HMRC. And the worst of it is, and it looks very much like, doesn't it, that sometimes we just go after the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to chase these people rather than chase the people that promoted these schemes and put them in this trouble in the first place. And everyone has said, and I'm going to say it too, these are people. When they came to see me first, I didn't know very much about this, but when people came to see me in my constituency and they told me, and they talked about the figures that they might have to pay, it was devastating. I couldn't believe what they have been told might happen to them. And I thought, what if that was me? If someone came to me and said, you owe tens of thousands of pounds, well, frankly, I would have no way of doing that without a significant change to my life. Well, fine. Maybe if I deserved it, I would have that coming. But if they didn't know that, why would their lives have to change so much, where some of them have now felt that their lives were no longer worth living? Madam Deputy Speaker, driving people to bankruptcy is not, in my opinion, the answer. What we should be doing is finding out how this happened, discovering who is culpable, including HMRC. I will.
I'm grateful for the honourable member for giving way. Does he agree with me it would be a clear injustice if anybody innocently caught up of having sought advice for one of these schemes were to lose their main home or indeed be made bankrupt as a result of this action?
It would be an absolute tragedy, and I think that is why I think that I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for bringing this debate here today, so that we can air it publicly in the way that we're doing. Because if anyone is made bankrupt from something which is not of their deliberate doing, then that would be a travesty. Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't propose to take very much more time. I know there's a lot of people waiting to speak, but it's not it's not a great ask for the Minister today to pause this, to review it independently, and give my constituents and everyone else in this House a bit of respite so that they know that what's happened to them is right.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as one of the Vice Chairs of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the loan charge, I would like to add my thanks to the members of the Loan Charge Action Group for all the work they've done in submitting evidence to us, and particularly to those few people who have worked their socks off in recent weeks in pulling together the report, the APPG report, which was released yesterday and is available online for anybody who wants to see it. I'm going to cover in my remarks I'm going to focus on the HMRC's communications with taxpayers that has led to many of the appalling stories that members across this House have and will relate today. I will.
Giving way, and a sort of permission to do so beforehand. Many of my constituents from Strangford have the same problems that everybody else has referred to, as well as Honourable Lady has referred to. What they're asking for is the 6-month delay to the loan charge before the review. And does she share my concerns, and these are real concerns, of those who have purported to have committed suicide and deaths, and who are facing unbelievable bankruptcy, having to sell their homes? The effect upon people's health is enormous.
Examples like that, one of them very tragic. We had the family of somebody who committed suicide, have already been mentioned today. And the stress is being well related by members today on behalf of their constituents. Can I just say that I knew very little about the issue until I met a group of my constituents. These are normal people. I don't know if anybody's normal, specialists in their field, middle-aged, but they've had to put their lives on hold. One couple can't get married and get a mortgage, another is making plans for their children's university education, and that's causing them real stress. Those who are still working are treading water, they're not investing, not employing, not generating wealth for this country. All are profoundly anxious, depressed, and it's affecting everything about their lives. And what I've learnt in this work that we've been doing in the recent months is there are roughly two groups of people, very roughly. The first, professional freelancers who went into the scheme starting up to 20 years ago, who generally, they're middle to high earners, generally took professional accounting advice about the options available in the post-IR35 world. This group, as I say, mainly professionals, went into loan schemes. For them, PAYE employment wasn't an option, and their accountants advised them that due to the regulatory complexity and the disproportionate cost burden of IR35, it would be best to enter into a loan-based enumeration scheme. And there was no question, there was no uncertainty about the legality of the scheme back then. I do want to complete my remarks. They made arrangements with umbrella companies to prevent them from inadvertently breaking the IR35 rules. And everyone I heard from these schemes who went into them was not to save tax, but to save the administrative burden. Then there's another group, an unknown number of more recent joiners since 2016 when the rules changed. They're working in public services, nurses, doctors, social workers. The word loan was never mentioned to them by the scheme providers. They generally didn't take separate professional accountancy advice. As they were signed up by a recruitment company who had links with the umbrella company, there appeared to be no choice, and quote, everyone we worked with was doing it. It's possible that many of these people don't know that they're caught up in this. Our inquiry evidence, I will if I get some time, our inquiry evidence shows that the HMRC were aware of these promoters, yet none have been investigated and prosecuted. Why is this? And why haven't they been chased? Now, the 45% non-refundable charge on all loans advanced during the period, unless the individual... there's a non-refundable charge, and unless the individual agrees to pay upfront a figure calculated by HMRC, completely opaquely, and regardless of whether any such tax was legally due at the time, is going to have to be paid. It's effective from tomorrow. Anyone who's ever been employed through a structure could face a retrospective charge in this year, just about to close, 2018-19 tax year, and payable by January 2010. So all potentially liability, could be for many years, is all going to be rolled up into this tax year, whether or not you know what your liability is. or indeed whether you are even aware that you have a liability. This cannot be within the spirit of natural justice. Now, how do people who do know about it know? Well, many of our inquiry respondents were notified of the loan charge in late 2018, some as late as this year. It's wholly inadequate given the life consequences of these demands. Standard letters are not going out. They're indiscriminately. They're to any individual who might have been employed by a company who might have undertaken a disclosed tax avoidance arrangement. Letters referred to closed tax years, as the Right Honourable Member has already mentioned, and even when the tax has been agreed and paid. Evidence shows there's no standard format in letters, no evidence provided, even of the years being, the dates of the years being queried. And by withholding this information, HMRC has failed in its duty of care to taxpayers who are unaware of their right to request disclosure. They face a greater retrospective penalty in a single year this year than might have otherwise been the case. Part of the belief that people were doing the right thing is that they believe loan charge arrangements were not taxable. We have HMRC correspondence of 2006. Quote, plans made by an EBT are not taxable under section 1373 and 174 of the Income Tax, Earnings and Pensions Act 2003, unquote. And furthermore, the Rangers Supreme Court case, which remains the position in law. Individuals are not liable, their employers are, yet HMRC is misinterpreting the outcome of that case. Now, we understand HMRC have used behaviour change specialists in pursuing the loan charge, which may explain the aggressive and opaque nature of their communications. Regular use of HMRC of the phrase asking people to, quote, put their tax affairs right, unquote, is clearly part of this strategy of forcing people to feel and accept guilt for wrongdoing. This is despite the arrangements that they used being entirely legal at the time. We've also had a disturbing number of reports of individual HMRC officers telling taxpayers they should apply for mortgages or loans, but not tell the lender that the money will be used to pay a tax bill. Why? Because, of course, that's contrary to tax law. Now, many of the taxpayers who submitted evidence to our inquiry highlighted the stress and anxiety they've experienced as a direct result of the language and tone of HMRC communications. Individuals who believed they were acting within the law told us they have been made to feel like criminals. The loan charge APPG agrees with this. It's wholly inappropriate for a government department to intimidate individuals into settlements through threats and labelling. Now, the stress has caused two but not interconnected things. One is the feeling of criminality. The family we heard from who read their father's suicide notes the father kept the information away from his family. He was too embarrassed. He was too embarrassed even to go and see a tax consultant, his accountant. He couldn't admit that he might have done wrong. He thought he was going to go to prison. His liability was well within his means in that example. He could have afforded to pay, but he was made to feel like a criminal, a man who had never done anything wrong or against the law in his life. And the others are the group of people whose homes are at threat, whose businesses are at threat, who are likely to be made insolvent. And they are, this is going to affect their whole lives, their whole families' lives, now and in the future. And for amounts that are often unjustified, unquantified, and unexplained. I will.
She's making an excellent speech. Does she agree with me that there are three fundamental elements of the injustice here? The retrospectivity, which undermines basic principles of justice, the devastating impact on people's lives that she's described, ordinary people, and the contrast of the arbitrary approach to those people with sweetheart deals for the likes of Goldman Sachs. Does she agree the retrospectivity must be ended and the scheme must be reviewed?
Yeah. We absolutely agree. The scheme needs a pause for at least 6 months. It needs a review by a qualified tax judge, completely independent of the government. And I'm also concerned that the HMRC have been acting possibly without direct steerage from the Treasury and from Treasury ministers, because ministers have said things to me, things to us as members of the Loan Charge APPG, that actually contradict what we've been told by credible witnesses. So there are a number of questions that this debate raises for the Treasury front bench, and we look forward to their responses.
Cheryl Gillen.
It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Brentford and Isleworth, and can I join others in congratulating my Honourable friend, the Member for Aberdeen South, and the other members that have secured this debate today. I really don't want to repeat some of the eloquent speeches that have been made here by other colleagues, but I think it is worth putting on record that this is not happening to a group of very high net worth individuals. This is happening to some very ordinary people. These are ordinary, hard-working people, and they are social workers, IT consultants, people in the everyday run of their lives. And quite frankly, if I was going to be cynical, I would say that the indictment of the HMRC, which the Honourable Lady was laying out for this chamber, is absolutely right, because I feel that these collection officials are cutting their teeth on a whole group of individuals that actually can't fight back. And this debate today shows how they can fight back, particularly when the voices of those people that aren't often heard are represented so well across the House. And indeed, I think the Honourable Member who chairs the APPG, actually, when he said it brings the House together, I think he's absolutely right. These are individuals. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give way, because there are a lot of people that want to speak, and the more I give way, the more their time gets reduced. I think what is really striking for me about this is that all these individuals actually made reasonable inquiries about what their tax liabilities were. They consulted professionals, they were offered advice. Indeed, the actions of HMRC almost reinforced that what they were doing was in fact a legal way of pursuing their employment. For some of our constituents, particularly, for example, those working in the banking industry, if, as a result of this, they're declared bankrupt, they will not even be able to legitimately pursue their careers and their means of earning a living, because they are specialists in that area and they'll be prohibited from working in the banking sector, and I think that that is absolutely appalling. I do want to just refer to some of my constituents and what they have said to me to reinforce some of the points that have been made. Certainly one of my constituents used an umbrella company, and they assured him that they were doing nothing, he was doing nothing wrong, and that it was an HMRC approved scheme. And when finally the bill landed on his desk, his umbrella company asked him to appeal, which he did. He received letters for other tax years apart from the year in question on which he appealed, but it was always at least 3 years after he sent in a tax return. In each case, HMRC only requested the tax that they say I owe after 3 years had passed. Another one said, I'm not a tax expert, and the policy left me extremely confused. I didn't know which way to turn. I was advised that I could use an arrangement that would ensure I was compliant with IR35, and my primary motive was to abide by the law. I was told that the tax arrangement was HMRC and QC approved. HMRC are now saying that these arrangements do not work, yet at the time they did nothing to curb them. They allowed me to build up years' worth of debt, signing off my tax returns, and on some occasions sending me a tax rebate. I simply don't have the sums of money involved. I'm not a wealthy person. I've worked hard and I've paid taxes. Over the 18 months, this situation has led me to anxiety, stress, and in some cases, suicidal thoughts. Because this person is a freelancer, he's had no holiday pay, sickness pay, maternity pay, compassionate leave, pension contributions, career development training, bonuses, and in many cases, certainly no job security. He's suffering from sleep deprivation, and of course, he's thinking that he can take out some sort of insurance that if he ended his life, it could secure his wife and children's future. That is a terrible thing to have to say about an individual. Now, the constituent said, I began receiving loans in late 2011. They were always very clearly disclosed to the HMRC within my annual self-assessment returns. And in mid-2012, HMRC reviewed the payroll arrangement and the loans provided to me and formally confirmed that they did not constitute tax avoidance. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, when you have HMRC giving that sort of reassurance to the taxpayers of the United Kingdom, you expect to be able to believe it. And no matter how much praise is heaped on the front bench and the Treasury Minister, with which I concur, the Treasury Minister is always polite, always replies, in fact is assiduous in dealing with my constituency correspondence, for which I am very grateful. I'm afraid I agree with the Right Honourable Member for Halton, Price and Howden, who is not in his place, who said that we cannot pursue anything before 2017, and I hope he will listen very carefully. I feel that HMRC has been trying to collect its taxes aggressively, but using what I consider to be a very tame audience in this case. I think they should direct their attentions towards the fraudsters and the mega companies, not just the JP Morgan schemes that are there, but the Googles and the Amazons and all the other companies, because in some instances our constituents are going to be asked to pay sums that are greater than a company like Amazon or Google has paid in tax years in this country. I have to say also that I consider that this has been used as a lost leader by HMRC because they have put so much into administration costs that they're almost caught that they cannot go back and abandon their pursuit of these individuals. I think they should do it, and certainly the Treasury bench now needs to pay attention to the will of this House and the fact that the anarchy of what has happened to our standing orders has resulted in us seeing this House taken over by people other than the government. And I think that there is a strength of feeling across the House, cross-party, that if there has to be some mechanism sought to try and get relief for our constituents, that is not something now which is beyond imagination.
Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South and his colleagues within the all-party group for the way they've taken up this issue, pursued it, and the incredibly well-informed report that they have delivered on it. Many of the points that I wanted to make have already been made, but there are one or two that I think are well worth underlining and reaffirming. First of all, the issues around the retrospective nature of the approach. The people who are caught by this are by and large people on ordinary or maybe slightly better than ordinary incomes, law-abiding, who were advised, maybe beguiled or in some cases even coerced into being part of these schemes. And secondly, hadn't been part of these schemes, filled in their tax returns, declared everything so that there was no attempt to hide their tax status and returns from HMRC. And whilst it may be true that HMRC did not approve those schemes, it is quite self-evident that they ignored whatever evidence was in front of them that may have justified taking action. And to take action now, after 20 years, is totally unfair, defies all laws of natural justice. I'm sorry, I'm not taking any interventions. And the government needs to do something about it. What is even more astonishing is that it would appear that the government had adequate legal redress over those years if it had wanted to. And the introduction of the loan charge legislation was in fact a measure designed to recoup that money in a simple way to avoid the length and hassle of taking action under previous legislation. It actually smacks of trying to maximise income from the softest targets with the minimum of costs. And the high volume of complaints that I've had about the process for actually achieving this underlines this particular point. Mention has been made that we're up against the deadline of Friday for people to give evidence of how they're going to settle their outstanding bills. I know in my constituency there are people who are absolutely scared witless because they're not in a position to do so. And they're not in a position, not because they've ignored HMRC, they provided them with the evidence and haven't had the figures necessary to make the decision on how to settle their affairs. So they're being threatened by HMRC on one hand. If they don't do it, the penalties will be invoked. On the other hand, HMRC have not provided with the evidence to actually do this. It is absolutely incredible, and I think underlines the impression that the HMRC are acting in a way to actually maximise the amount of income that they can get from the individuals trapped in this. I did look at the HMRC document on this, and particularly under the section of supporting people. And unbelievably, it says that people must realise their assets as necessary. I suppose if you're a multi-millionaire, that's a reasonable approach to take. But for ordinary people, particularly retired people on low income that may just have their homes as their main asset, that is a totally inappropriate way of saying you're supporting something. I have had somebody come into my surgery saying they think that as from April the 5th, because they have not got figures, they're going to have to sell their house. And it's all right for the HMRC to say you won't have to sell your house. If that's your only asset and you've got to realise that asset, then you've got no alternative. And then it says you can remortgage. Well, if you're a retired person on a low income and go to a financial institution and say, I need to remortgage my property so I can pay off my tax debts, I don't think they'll find a very sympathetic response from that particular institution. And what we have in that document, quite frankly, is a lot of honeyed words which actually don't give any help or succour to those who are confronted with this potentially devastating, life-changing financial experience. Now, HMRC, and I praise them for this, do hold surgeries in this House of Commons for us to go along. I went along with a couple of cases on loan charges, and would you believe it, there was nobody there who was in a position to give me an answer. Now, given the fact that this is the pre-eminent issue that members face as of this moment, and HMRC presumably are trying to improve the communication between constituents, MPs and themselves, it does seem to me to be an amazing omission, and can only underline again the fact that HMRC does seem totally indifferent to the plight that their particular processes and the culture that's surrounding those processes are generating. I would just conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Minister. There will be thousands of people watching this debate today knowing that their future welfare, their livelihood and their happiness can depend on the words of advice that you give at the conclusion of this debate. I just hope that it will be favourable. Treasury ministers don't often have a chance to make people happy, but here's an opportunity to do so. Mike Penning.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I say at the outset that I shouldn't be here today. I should be at the funeral of my constituent Graham Stewart. I promised I would be there. He was the chairman of Leverstock Green Football Club, and as his constituency MP and as president of Hemel Hempstead Football Club, another community club, I desperately wanted to be there. But my place is here in this debate, making sure I stand up initially for one of my constituents who came to see me many months ago, which is when I joined your parliamentary group. I was informed this morning that I have now 100 constituents that are affected by loan charge. I sat in on some of the evidence sessions that were brought to the All Parliamentary Group. Can I just touch on this for a second, Mr Deputy Speaker? And I think it's really, really important. We have select committees in this House, and we have other committees, and we have... The role of all parliamentary groups can be a complete waste of time, or they can really, really make a difference. I chair one of those groups, jointly chair one of those groups on medical cannabis, which we have managed to change the law on, and I truly hope that this all-parliamentary group, with the backing of the House, will be able to sway the Minister's and the Treasury's view on this, which I think is one of the great disasters that we're bringing on our communities. Over 900 years ago, this House was formed to represent the people paying tax. In those days, completely unelected, admittedly, but it is our job. And unlike some of my colleagues, I clearly have upset the Minister and on the Treasury bench this morning, and I was overzealous defending my constituents, and I've apologised to him privately, and I will apologise to him publicly now. I think he is fundamentally wrong in what he said to me, but at the end of the day, that was his opinion, and I'm sure the Treasury's opinion. But in my opinion, what is happening here with some of my constituents that took advice from the companies, and they wouldn't have got the job, took advice from some very large taxation accountants, submitted completely openly that they were in one of these schemes. They had a registration number from Majesty's Treasury, and now they're getting bills for hundreds of thousands of pounds, which, as we've heard, bear with me a second, as we have heard, is completely and utterly destroying their lives. I've had constituents in front of me, like lots of colleagues, and I'm not making it. I'm not going to name these people because they are part of the problem we have here. They are absolutely ashamed of telling their loved ones that these bills are coming down the line. They're petrified of their employers knowing. Many of mine in my constituency, many of the people that come to see me and have written to me, are employed within the financial sector in the city. They will lose their jobs. Absolutely no doubt. They will lose their jobs and their livelihood. I'm going to give way twice, once to the honourable gentleman, and I've already...
I'm very grateful to my honourable for giving way, because he's putting a very, very strong and very moving case. But I just wanted to ask him whether he was aware that there were early retirement benefit schemes, so-called EFIRB schemes, that are also being unpicked retrospectively, causing an equal amount of pain and suffering to constituents, including one in my constituency, who is having to pay back £175,000.
The way that the Treasury have started to unpick people's personal taxation schemes, going back, not the big companies that get away with murder, frankly, because they can employ the right sort of lawyers, the right sort of... Small people, they're the people that are going to be masturbated. I'll give way once more and then I will mention...
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I know he's short of time, but he and the House might be interested in a reply that I had in the Public Accounts Committee from Jim Hara, who is the second permanent secretary at HMRC, and he says, and I quote as follows: "Among the disguised remuneration users, there are undoubtedly people who have liabilities for years, where under normal rules we do not now have accessing rights. In our settlement opportunity, we have asked these people to settle for all years, including the years for which we do not have these accessing rights. If they choose not to do that, I can't make them settle voluntarily for these years." Does he not think my right honourable friend on the front bench should formalise that tax advice?
Go down to 5 minutes to get them all in, due to the intervention. So
on that basis, Mr Deputy Speaker, I will not give way any more. And I think that would be right and proper to let colleagues in, no matter how short the interventions will be. I think the point that my honourable friend has made here, is there one rule on taxation in this country for one person, a small business, or am I missing something here? It seems to me that even with these schemes, for instance, I had a constituent come to see me who worked alongside another colleague that actually was in the same scheme. Their scheme, his scheme, the first one, say constituent A, had his scheme closed, agreed and closed. He disclosed everything. He disclosed the registration number, the DOTAS number. Closed, finished. The reason he came to me is because he was sitting next door to a colleague who was doing exactly the same job, under exactly the same contract, under exactly the same schemes, and exactly the same declarations that for nearly 15 years had been left open. There's something fundamentally wrong in doing that. And the conclusions that the committee has come out with, I think, are eminently sensible. I agree with my honourable friend from Houghton Price and Houghton that perhaps we could have been a bit stronger, but we might have lost some people on each side. We can work with this. I'm slightly concerned about the use of the word tax judges, a judge that is in, because the reason for that is, for instance, Ray McCann, who's the president of the Chartered Institute of Taxation, has said that technically it is not retrospective. So that's where the taxation people are going to come from. But he then went on to say that it has an effect of being retrospective. Now that sounds like semantics to everybody else out there, but if we have a specialist judge that is involved in taxation, that's what he's going to look at when we're arguing the point. The point is it's clearly retrospective. Well, this is where the Minister and I completely disagreed. Can I say to the Minister, he has a golden opportunity, an absolutely golden opportunity, to say, stop. Let's actually see what the effect is here. Why are we picking on these people that in many cases can't pay? Not won't pay, can't pay. As we've heard earlier on, they're being advised to get loans. Where are they going to do that? Where is the equity that they're going to use their house? Many of them are of a similar age to myself. They have got absolutely no chance. They can pay through the nose on interest rates and borrow money from anybody. Do we really want to encourage that? Or would we like to say, we think there's something gone wrong here. This House has come together from across, I think, 6 parties, I think the chairman of the All-Parliamentary Group said, there is something seriously wrong. These people are petrified. My constituents have said to me, if my wife finds out about this, she has suicidal tendencies, we've already got major problems. I've got others who will say, I need to come out of retirement. Actually, I've been in the IT industry out for about 5 or 6 years now. I've got no chance of coming back into this industry. Others, their employers, if they found out that there is action being taken in this sort of way in the finance world, they've had it. What are we doing, driving people into this sort of debt when actually they thought they were doing the right thing? And I say to the Minister, in all candour, take a look around this House today, on a Thursday, on a one-line whip, when even I think the whips couldn't have got this many people in here with what's going on at the moment, from both sides of the House, and I'm really serious, I don't think the whips could have got this many people in here on a Thursday on a one-line whip. But what has driven us here is our constituents. It's our job. It's what this Parliament was set up to do, to defend the little guy against the big guy, and the big guy's the government, and we will defend the little guy.
Jim Fitzpatrick on a 5-minute limit.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to be called to contribute to this debate affecting many of my constituents, and very pleased to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Hemel Hempstead. I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Aberdeen South and other colleagues who bid for this debate, and thank the Bank Business Committee for affording the time. I also commend the cross-party APPG leadership and the Honourable Gentleman for Aberdeen South for his excellent opening speech. I want to concentrate on relaying a few constituents' comments to the Treasury bench to show the strength and depth of feeling in this issue, because they speak much more effectively for themselves than I could do on their behalf. Mark and his partner John wrote to express their concerns. For them, the main issue is the retrospective aspect of legislation which stretches back over 10 years that were allowed to operate with no notification to members at the time. They fear the knock-on effect of bankruptcy to contractors, which means he will fail the credit checks and is unlikely to work in the financial sector ever again. Another constituent, Vladimir, says his loan provider shared his daughter number with HMRC every year and disclosed the promoter name and benefit in kind that the loan was providing for him. Daniel similarly says the loan he received were all disclosed on his tax returns.
Ronnie wrote, as I moved from permanent to contracting, I used an agency, Aston May, who advised me about the benefits of using a limited company or using an LLP. I also used a UK chartered accountant who was fully aware of the LLP I was working for. Amjad got in touch to say, and I quote, "This issue has taken over my life since I received a letter from HMRC last August," and makes the same point about fully declaring. Another constituent facing serious trouble, Rehan, wrote, "On a personal level, the threat of loan charges made me incredibly stressed and physically unwell." Todd, like many in his position, contends there was nothing disguised nor contrived about the arrangements. Taxpayers described in detail exactly what their tax arrangements were under doters. Another constituent, Abdul, said, "If the schemes have always been defective, why did HMRC not write directly to affected individuals and advise them of this?" Richard got in touch and echoes the previous point, saying HMRC and the Treasury say these arrangements are defective and have never worked, but not once did HMRC communicate that they believed the schemes were defective and never worked, which means he's now liable for over £200,000. Marie writes, and I quote, "It makes my blood boil when I hear you should have known better. No one told me. I'm not an expert in tax. I'm risk averse, and I would not have entered into the arrangement if I even had a sniff that it was not legal. I've already had to sell my house to pay the first lot of APNs which came through and don't have any savings or a home." Mr Deputy Speaker, the solid theme of frustration, confusion and bleak despair runs through every email, letter and meeting I've had on this. HMRC and the Minister keep saying this isn't retrospective, the average amount is 13,000 and everyone knew what they were doing. Clearly that is not the case, as has been emphatically contradicted by my constituents. In conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I wish to thank the Loan Charge Action Group and its Secretary and former colleague Greg Mulholland for their work on this. 3 recommendations for their report stand out for me, and they are certainly reasonable, as a number of colleagues have already said this morning. Firstly, the request for a 6-month delay to the loan charge. Secondly, a 24-hour HMRC-funded mental helpline to help prevent more suicides. And finally, a full and proper review led by an expert tax judge. I look forward to the Minister's response, and with the unanimity of opinion so far across this chamber this morning, and given the number of compliments that he has been paid by so many colleagues on both sides of the House in this debate, my hopes have been raised, sir.
We now come to Sir Paul Beresford.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm a little cautious joining this debate because I haven't got the full knowledge that many of you have, or the experience, and I haven't got many cases in my constituency. I have a considerable number over the years of cases of dealing with the HMRC. And contrary to the points that many of the people made, individual approaches to individual taxation experts in HMRC have been extremely positive. And I have found that the cases have been listened to and we've got some dramatic changes. I've got 6 loan charges and I've got one other one that I think is slightly relevant, but it's not a loan charge. I was approached by this individual some years ago. He was divorced and his wife, some years before, moved, of all places, to New Zealand. He had a large monthly payment to her and some support for the child, and she remained single. So he thought. And after a considerable number of years, he discovered that in fact she had got married, and all that maintenance that he had paid over those years, vast sums, he shouldn't have paid. So he stopped paying. And HMRC came along and said, "Why aren't you paying it?" Because it was tax deductible. And he explained. And they said, "Well, the money you've paid when you shouldn't have paid is now counted as profits. And we would like tax on that, plus interest." He wasn't suicidal. He came close to considering murder, but wasn't suicidal. The wife is still, the ex-wife is still alive. And we went and saw HMRC. And we got an agreement on this retrospective, if you like to call it, or retroactive payment. It was spread over time. The collector was eminently reasonable, and it was managed. And when the circumstances of this individual changed, he went to university, again we went back, and again they changed it. So if there's anything else we get out of here, what I am saying to my 6 loan charge cases, or those who want help, and only 2 of them do, is that I'm prepared to take up their cases and work with them. Because you all in this chamber will realise when you've got that portcullis on your letter and you ask for a meeting, it happens. And that has to be the best way through it. Now, what I have discovered in doing this is that some of the information that the Inland Revenue, the HMRC, have been given by those 2 cases doesn't match the real information. And when I hear members say, as we have, that the communications have broken down, that the information they've used has given incorrect decisions, some of that is because they are not, and probably deliberately, being given every sample of the information that they need to come to a fair and clear decision. I couldn't believe 2 of them in particular, who are bright individuals, professionals and independent, that they had actually taken up their particular loans. And I asked one of them to explain it to me, because I'm fairly simple, I can only count to 32, that how they came about it. And they said, well, we were told it was all right. And I said, yes, by who? They said the promoters. And I said, can you describe it to me? Well, they said, we worked for whoever it was, and they gave me money, but it wasn't payment, it was a loan. I said, fine. What's the interest on it? Oh, there's no interest. When do you pay it back? Oh, we're not going to pay it back, and we're not paying any tax on it. I said, that's just too good to be true.
Were the Honourable Gentleman give way?
Just once, very quickly.
I must confess that I share some of his mixed feelings about this issue, particularly as what my constituents say to me and what the Minister says to me. There seems to be a disparity. Where there does seem to be culpability from HMRC, from my perspective, is that they knew full well about some of these loan schemes for a very long time, and subsequently a political decision was made to call them in, and that political decision actually could have been taken much, much earlier, so they wouldn't have seen some of this damage, and that creates a lot of uncertainty within the wider tax system, which actually is very corrosive.
I thank the Honourable Lady for nothing else, but she's given me a minute more. I'll leave that for the Minister to answer. I can only go by the 6 cases I've seen, and that doesn't apply in the 6 cases that I've seen. So if I can say anything to members, please, can you get these cases? Can you put them together? Can you go and ask an individual senior tax inspector? No, I've got no time, it's up. And I found them really cooperative, the inspector and the collector, because it makes such a difference to these people's lives, and the look on their faces when I've come out of the meetings with the officials of relief and an acceptance that they're going to have to pay it, even though it is many are calling retrospective, I call retroactive. And I do remember the case of the divorced man who didn't commit murder, and his bill was way up over £100,000.
Sammy Wilson. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a joy to follow the member for Mole Valley, though I've got to say I disagree with much of what he has said, because of course this is not just an issue of if you can get people sitting down with the right tax inspector, this can be sorted out. I think the debate today has shown that there's a deep-rooted problem right at the heart of this issue, namely that something which people entered into fully aware of the kind of scheme that they had, but understanding that it was fully legal, and then suddenly find that they're faced with huge tax bills, and many people are finding themselves hitting their head against the brick wall of officialdom with frustration, anger and fear, and something which I think, as we have discussed here today, it needs sorted out, not at some official level, but it needs sorted out at government level and ministerial decision. The economist Adam Smith, who wrote the first economics textbook, laid down what were called the canons or the principles of taxation. What should the basis of any tax system be? And he mentioned three things. First of all, there should be certainty. Secondly, there should be fairness. And thirdly, there should be convenience. And if we look at what is happening with this loan charge, we can see that all of those principles of taxation, the rules for good application of tax, have been broken. Many of these people who entered into these schemes entered in, many because they did want to reduce their tax bill, and that's perfectly legitimate. There's a difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, and I don't think anyone here today has advocated that if people have been evading their taxes, then they shouldn't be pursued. But some of them were forced to enter these schemes. They couldn't have got employment otherwise. In fact, in the evidence we got at the APG, there was evidence that even HMRC were taking on contractors, who in turn then took on employees, and who paid them and insisted they had to be paid by these remuneration schemes. And yet, it seems that HMRC were quite happy to employ contractors on that basis, because the scheme was deemed illegal. And I believe that there are a number of members have gone through them, but let me just reiterate some of them. First of all, I don't believe that this scheme and the loan charge meets the criteria of ensuring that there is certainty for taxpayers. It is retrospective, and no matter how the Minister tries to wriggle on it, it's if you impose tax on a loan balance today, and that loan balance has been built up over a number of years, and it's been built up over a number of years because people thought that it was okay to be paid in that way, then the tax which people are going to pay today is retrospective, or being demanded is retrospective.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's making the point about the loan charge actually being a current liability, which is obviously the government's argument. But does he agree with me that actually what our constituents need is clarity about what recourse they have for the advisers that told them to go for these schemes, and clarity from HMRC about the options for refinancing and what protections they have as citizens?
And of course, the other point about the retrospective nature is that many of those people thought they had put in their tax returns, they had given all of the information, they hadn't been told there'd be an inquiry into their tax affairs, so of course they believed that what they were doing was perfectly legal, and the payments which they had would not be subject to additional tax already. And it brings me to the second point. And that's the issue of the second issue of certainty, because many of those who give evidence were told that they were given tax bills for years that didn't even work. They were given tax bills for sums that didn't seem to coincide with what they'd earned. And indeed, in some cases, they found that they were told it was just an estimate. In fact, one of the people who gave evidence told us that when she queried it, she said, well, the HMRC said, well, that's what most other people are paying. And this is how the tax bill has been worked out in some cases. So there was no degree of certainty, because it wasn't related very often to even the years that people worked or the income which they had earned. In terms of fairness, now I do come to the point which the member made. Is it fair that the people who promoted these tax schemes, none of them have been pursued? The people who are being pursued are the people who were the recipients, and sometimes, and some occasions, as already said, forced into it. They couldn't have got employment otherwise. The employer said, this is the way you'll get paid, and this is what you'll have to do. And yet, the promoters of those schemes, many of them who were offshore, many of them who are now no longer in business, are not being pursued, and the people who are being faced with a tax liability are those who were, in many occasions, that was the only way they could get employment. In fact, some of the evidence that we got at the committee was that if people did not settle, then they might be subjected to being taxed not just on the money which they received, but the fees which were taken off them by those who have now disappeared. Now, is that fair? And I suppose it comes to we'll come to the third point, and that is the convenience. And it is, when it comes to paying, that's why we pay PAYE, we pay our tax on a monthly basis or whatever, rather than being hit with a huge sum of money all at once. And with the way in which this has been,
On the point about the huge sum of money at once, this is exactly the number of the issue. Regardless of the rights or wrongs of the case, does the honourable gentleman agree with me that these people need huge amounts of time to pay, or in some cases debt forgiveness, because they simply cannot afford to pay?
And in fact, I just wanted to come to the point of debt forgiveness, because of course, when it comes to large companies, HMRC are prepared to negotiate sums of money and cut tax bills quite significantly. While in these particular cases, it's a case, there is the sum, pay it by and enter into a discussion and a settlement with us, or else you will be hit with the loan charge subsequently. So I think that for all of those reasons, this is a scheme which does not require, as the member for Mole Valley said, just simply taking constituents along and sitting down with a tax inspector. This requires action by the Minister. We have asked for reasonable action from a reasonable minister, and I trust that that's what we'll get today.
Chris Bimblad.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to give an apology to my right honourable friend the Minister if I'm not here for his reply. I'm flying to Rome to go to the Vatican for an engagement on behalf of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for International LGBT Rights, which goes to show how important these APPGs can be, and I hope there's going to be a significant development in policy in that area. However, I do want to congratulate my honourable friend for Aberdeen South for both for his excellent speech introducing us, and of course the officers of the APPG who have done so much work for all of us in representing the interests of our constituents. None of us want to see our tax system being abused. We should all pay our fair share of taxes, and we must ensure a level playing field for the sake of integrity of our economic model. And the interests of those who do not have the means to opt for or set up complex tax schemes should be as protected as those who can afford this advice. And therefore, of course, the start point has got to be that it's right that in the Finance Act, the government, 2017, the government sought to close the disguised remuneration loophole. But what is in question today is the way in which the Treasury has handled this closure. And my right honourable friend for Halton Price and Howden, who was the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee in my first Parliament, was completely right about the change in culture inside the Inland Revenue and the Treasury towards these issues over the last two decades. And its policy now is having an unfair, retrospective effect, recklessly throwing the lives of thousands across the country into sheer chaos. And it also, sadly, highlights some of the HMRC's own performance issues, as it appears to have failed to adequately inquire into the notifications by honest taxpayers of their use of a scheme under the disclosure of tax avoidance schemes when it had the chance. So I do not understand why the HMRC now thinks it's fair to go back over records up to 20 years old and unexpectedly ask for sums of tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds of ordinary hard-working people. It completely baffles me. More to the point, Mr Deputy Speaker, who are these people? By and large, they are the most flexible and most entrepreneurial workers in our system, who have then been employed flexibly in order to give of their time, and as we've heard from other honourable ladies and gentlemen who don't receive holiday pay, don't receive the allowances because of the employment conditions under which they have. So we've heard how our constituents are seriously distressed by the vast amounts of money the Treasury is trying to claw back off them in a totally unexpected way. They've also experienced repeated delays in the handling of their cases, resulting in even more uncertainty and pressure. And they've experienced consistently poor communication from HMRC, One constituent sharing with me that an advisor on a dedicated helpline told him under no circumstances to quote her. And whilst I am grateful for the letter dated yesterday that the outstanding PPS to the Treasury made available to me in the course of today's debate, I do wonder when it says, I strongly encourage any of your constituents affected by this issue to contact HMRC as soon as possible before the 5th of April. I have enclosed a fact sheet on disguised remuneration and further information support available from HMRC. Well, it's a bit of a stretch, Mr Deputy Speaker, to get that information to constituents by tomorrow. And I do appreciate that is a message that the Treasury have been putting out. However, the HMRC website says that it's estimated that 75% of the income of this policy will come from employers and 25% from individuals, and it says that so far 85% of that money has been raised by employers. I don't think that's entirely surprising, because employers, of course, are not in the same position as the individuals, and so it's much easier for them to then come up with a bill, which they've then been presented with HMRC. It is the little people who are on the receiving end of this. And one of my constituents who is facing bankruptcy clearly articulates the issue. In short, HMRC got tired of going for the scheme providers because they knew how to deal with them and were always one step ahead of them. Due to their inability to get any perceived tax they feel are owed out of them, they've now shifted the focus further down the chain to people like me. I just want to say to my right honourable friend, who has had plaudits from all across the House, I hope that the steel I detect in his position...
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to speak in this important debate. In January last year, Labour's Shadow Treasury Minister said, of the impending deadline of April next year to pay the loan charges, that we cannot let vulnerable people who have been exploited end up with massive tax debts hanging over their heads for many years to come. And if we see bankruptcies, failing businesses, repossessions, and even suicides, that will be because this government has not done enough to outreach needed and not invested in adequate training. I'm sorry to say this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we heard on the 1st of April that HMRC had reported itself to the police of the death of an individual who had been notified of loan charge bill. It was the first time HMRC felt it had been given sufficient evidence to link a death to the loan charge. I don't know any details of this case, and I don't want to speculate, but this was a tragic loss of a life, and it's a reminder for all of us what is at stake here.
Yep. I've met with some of my constituents who have told me that they'll be severely affected by this retrospective loan charge if it's rolled out tomorrow, and have devastating effects for their families and themselves. So does he agree with me that this charge should be halted and a review set up to investigate the HMRC's actions in this matter?
I thank my honourable friend for making this very important point, and I entirely agree with his point, and it's very important that we make sure that people don't suffer because of this very unfair loan charges. I have a number of constituents whose lives have been turned upside down by the changes to tax legislation in DR schemes 3 years ago. On the face of it, I support the government's move to clamp down on the tax avoidance schemes, but the way the loan charges has been handled is confusing and cruel and seems less guided by principles, but rushing through a badly designed process to reclaim taxes. The Director General for Customer Strategy and Tax Design at HMRC told the House of Lords Economic Affairs Subcommittee in October 2018 that the loan legislation was put in place because it was just too much time and trouble for HMRC to exercise its pre-existing powers conferred by Parliament. I give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech, and indeed my constituency has seen 100 affected. I'm grateful to Mr Salotra and Mr George from Hounslow West who came to the rally yesterday. They also highlighted that families are under great strain and stress, and the situation that we are in is one of policy failure. Would he agree with me that it has been a contribution also of the inadequate research and inadequate impact analysis on this policy that has contributed to the pain and the strain, and that for people who thought they were doing the right thing, who want to do the right thing, that the delay and the review is not just the right but the human thing to now do?
I agree with my honourable friend who made a very important point. And one of my constituents recently wrote to me and pointed out that essentially we have legislation being enacted because HMRC find it too difficult and troublesome to follow the rules, and yet they expect taxpayers to follow the rules, and they don't follow the rules themselves. No one disputes that HMRC has a right to challenge companies and individuals that have participated in tax avoidance arrangements. But Parliament gave HMRC powers to do so long before the loan charge legislation was proposed. These powers have not been exercised, making a mockery of the existing legislation and denying taxpayers their legitimate right to have their dispute resolved by the courts. Many had no idea whether or not the schemes they're getting into by the employees were effective or defective. It is completely unfair to penalise those people who are innocent and not those who design, enable these complicated and vague structures. Differentiation must therefore be applied between those who entered into these arrangements, arguably with their eyes open, and those who were entered into them by their employers. The legislation has allowed thousands of people to accrue a tax debt that was yet to be invented when employees invested in good faith. If nothing changes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thousands of people will be made bankrupt, families will be destroyed, and innocent people will have their lives ruined. Thank you.
Justine Greening.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, like many other members in this House, I've got a number of constituents who are affected by this. When one of them first came to see me in my MP surgery, I listened. It was a complex tax case. But for me, as a former Treasury Minister, it soon became clear that the way this was being handled was genuinely not the way that I had been used to seeing things being dealt with at my time at Treasury. And I think, alongside many other colleagues in this House, and I know my next-door neighbour, the Honourable Member for Wimbledon, I think we're right to be raising our concerns about what's going on today, not least because of the very personal impact it is having on thousands of people, frankly, around this country who have this hanging over them and nothing really being done to resolve the situation other than those people representing them being able to set out how much of an impact it's having on their lives. I have young constituents who are contractors who've just been unwittingly caught up in this. They did all the right things, asking their accountant, checking out whether a QC had approved a scheme. I've got an older gentleman who's caught up in it, looking at having to sell his home, and he's in his 70s and clearly has no ability to go back into the workplace to even begin to recoup some of the money that HMRC is now claiming he should pay. And I think there are a number of issues with all of this, but in the end it comes down to how we in this House and HMRC look at the concept of fairness. And fairness in relation to taxation. And what I would say is I think HMRC have simply got it wrong. And the balance that is being struck is in the wrong place. And I very much would urge the Minister, who I agree is a talented Minister, but in the end, it's these more challenging areas of policy that make or break that reputation than the day-to-day ability to be able to do a brilliant job, as others have said, on turning around constituency casework, where I think he's almost unparalleled in his assiduousness. So I do hope that he uses his talent to now find a way through this and to come up with a compromise that can bring a quick resolution. The approach being taken circumvents taxpayer protections on time limits, on HMRC inquiries, as many have said. The bottom line is Overwhelmingly, people did declare these arrangements quite transparently. They sent in their tax returns, as some have said. Some were given tax rebates. They were given no indication that HMRC were ever going to come back to these years. I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I'm also an ex-Treasury Minister and her neighbour as well. Could you just say something? I mean, the unusual nature of this as well, sometimes the very large sums that are involved. One of my constituents has got £300,000 assessed on this, and although the average is 13,000, that can mask some quite big numbers involved here as well.
He's absolutely right. One of my constituents has done their own estimate. They believe that this could cost them £230,000. It's an estimate, because back in 2013-14, as they say, I was first contacted by HMRC in 2013-14 about income from just the 2008 to 10 tax years, and having accepted my appeal letter to their inquiries, I haven't heard anything from them since. So 5 years on, I still have no clear idea what HMRC believes I owe them and the real justification for it. As they say, communication from HMRC has been inconsistent and sporadic at best. In addition, and I want to come on to this in the time I have remaining, HMRC does not appear to be targeting the companies who were, and in some cases still are, providing these tax planning schemes, but rather the individuals who use them. Sadly, there are still people joining these schemes today unaware of the impact it's likely to have on them. Now, HMRC's approach to the loan charge has, I believe, been punitive rather than proportionate. It is essentially, for some constituents, grouped up to 20 years of charges and then lumped them into one big sum that they are now being asked to pay. And I want to finally finish my comments.
The roof's leaky.
With a leaky roof in the background. This has been an interesting week for other events happening whilst members have been giving speeches. I want to conclude my remarks actually on the really important area of what on earth is being done to tackle these people promoting these schemes. These are the people who have effectively, and I believe knowingly in many cases, missold schemes. They have got rich on the back of them and left the people who were part of them to then pick up the pieces. I will give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. Over 10 years ago, Roy Fachney and David Perrin were arrested and later convicted, non-accountants, in an accountant's tax firm, but their clients weren't told that 10 years later the HMRC might come after them. That strikes me as grossly unfair and out of time.
Well, I think that's right, and I think it would be good for the Minister to be clearer about how many schemes HMRC is aware of, how many are currently being addressed by HMRC and tackled, how many remain unaddressed today, what penalties have currently been issued in relation to closing down these schemes, what amount has that totted up to, what action has been taken against the directors who pursued these schemes and promoted them, knowing often that they are not compliant with HMRC. Will they ever be barred from being directors in the future? They're clearly reckless and not fit, I think, to be company directors. And I think the more that we can send out a message across the industry that this behaviour is not acceptable and that actually lost revenue will seek firstly to be recouped from these businesses and companies promoting the schemes, and they're the ones at risk. That will happen first, and then perhaps second there will be more clear-cut rules for people to understand when they themselves are putting themselves at risk in their assets through participating in these sorts of schemes. Mr Deputy Speaker, it really is time, I think, that HMRC did all of the people caught up unwittingly in this loan charge issue a favour. Set out some kind of a sensible compromise that drew a line in the sand, that did not go back so far, and that treated them with some dignity and enabled them to either, where they still owe money, settle, but where not, frankly, be able to move on with their lives and get clarity on that as soon as possible.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I hope I can complete my speech before rain stops play. And I think there's probably some kind of symbol about how many people view how broken Parliament is going on there. But let's return to the matter in hand. And I want to congratulate the member for Aberdeen South on securing this debate. It's clear this issue has caused much distress, brutally so at times. And of course it's the case that if tax is due, then it should be collected. And without the ability to raise funds for taxation, our public services will obviously grind to a halt. But where my concern, and indeed many other honourable members' concerns, lies in the way this loan charge and the recovery of it has been handled to date. It does raise for me questions about whether HMRC can say in all honesty that each individual case is being looked at properly before the menacing letters are sent out. I want to make it absolutely clear, if following due process it is determined that money is owed, then it should be recovered in a fair, consistent and reasonable manner. However, what I've heard does raise questions about the capacity of HMRC to deal with these issues properly. So I previously raised the issue of my constituent, Mr Crook, when we debated the matter in Westminster Hall back in November, and I recounted the 6 times he had contacted HMRC about his potential liability without any response. And I explained the immense anxiety he was feeling because he wasn't getting any answers and he feared bankruptcy. And since my involvement, there have been a response from HMRC, and I'm sure it was entirely coincidental that it came the week after the Westminster Hall debate. And I wish I could say that somehow we've managed to reach a happy ending there. But we've had tales from them of spam boxes, deleted emails, and the wonderful phrase that my constituents' request will be progressed within the normal timescales. Yet here we are, 360 days after my constituent registered his interest with HMRC, and still no agreement has been reached. And he isn't the only one in this position, so I repeat the question I raised back in November. Does the Department consider they have sufficient resources to deal with this issue? I will.
I've had an honourable member for giving way. I took a constituent called Jeff, who's lived by the rules and played by the rules, and certainly submitted tax returns year in, year out, and yet he's found like he's suffering this injustice, this retrospective injustice.
Thank you, Honourable Friend, for his intervention. He's absolutely right. It's the retrospectivity of this that is really very difficult for people to reconcile with what they consider to be a fair and transparent process. In that regard, I have had constituents raise concerns that if they do manage to reach agreement with HMRC, then they will be required to sign a settlement document that stops them reclaiming money from HMRC if they are later judged against in a judicial review. The retrospectivity of this does sit very uncomfortably with me, but also I think the idea that the government will not be bound by future court decisions goes very much against the rule of law that we are used to in this country. And that's the wholly unsatisfactory situation we face at the moment. But I just want to go back to where we all started with this. My constituent tells me that having submitted his tax returns each year when he was working, they have never been queried.
A point of order, Sir William Cash.
I wonder what was going on. Is it hot air that's escaping from in here?
Somebody might say there's a leak in Parliament at the moment, so we'll take it from there. Justin Mammers.
I'm sure many cabinet meetings have similar difficulties, Mr Deputy Speaker. So my constituent tells me that having submitted his tax returns each year when he was working, they have never been queried. He states that by doing this, HMRC have at the very least implicitly, or if not explicitly, accepted that any monies he received in the form of a loan were indeed just that. But it is the retrospective nature and long reach of this loan charge which is so hard for him to accept. I understand that it's been claimed that HMRC have always said that these arrangements were unacceptable, but I haven't seen anything prior to 2016 to suggest that was the case. And I wonder if, when responding, the Minister can advise whether in future I should be advising my constituents that they should no longer consider HMRC responses to tax returns to be final, that they can be reopened at any point, that any schemes registered with HMRC can in fact be overturned decades in the future. Can the Minister also advise whether any companies who made loans will be pursued for employer national insurance contributions as well? And what if the company is no longer trading? Will the employees' national insurance records be updated? I also just want to say a few words about the human cost of all this. HMRC has admitted in responses to FOI requests that no assessment was made of the likely number of taxpayer bankruptcies that will result from this charge. Yet the official HMRC statement says the government anticipates that...
No photographs. Okay, you're holding it up.
Please. I'll carry on. The HMRC statement says the government anticipates that some of these individuals will become insolvent as a result. This measure is not expected to have a material impact on family formation, stability or breakdown. And I find that statement unbelievable on 2 counts. The first is how little understanding and empathy there is for those who face bankruptcy. Anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes in the real world will know that individual insolvency has a massive impact on families. The other huge reservation I have about this is where it appears to be saying, on the one hand, it has not made an assessment on the number of bankruptcies, but it does claim that there will be some insolvencies. If people have to be made bankrupt, then I think we all are clear that something has gone terribly wrong. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, before we get the paddles out, I would like to ask the government to think about what kind of message this whole mess is sending out to entrepreneurs, the people the Conservative Party once used to consider the bedrock of their support. Under this government, those people are being left with the very distinct impression that HMRC are prioritising recovery over tax revenue over justice by targeting individuals rather than the promoters of the scheme, many of whom still enjoy generous contracts with government. They knew what they were doing but appear to have accepted no responsibility for the actions they face and face no consequences. And the suggestion that some public sector employers were insisting that the people paying the price now would only be employed if they agreed to accept the kind of contracts that HMRC are now declaring unlawful is an absolute outrage.
I'm going to suspend the sitting, and when we come back, the bells will ring 2 minutes before we restart. So the sitting is now suspended, and no photographs, please.
And now I've got things to sort out. With the younger. Is it? Oh, that's where it's coming in. Well, we've been around the mics.
You had? Okay. So no mic suffering at that. Great.
Order! Order.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Order. This House now stands adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.